Hey guys, after posting the video for the last Archon quest, rounding up everything in Inazuma, I read your comments and realized that I had some more thoughts that I want to add to the end of that video. So I'm decided to make a different video talking about things that I've thought about after the quest has ended and things that I've read in your comments that kind of sparked more conversation. So first of all, this video is obviously going to have spoilers for everything up until now that's been released for Inazuma, so that includes the entire Archon quest and Ball's story quest. Second of all, there might be some spoilers for Honkai, so if you're thinking about playing the story or worried about spoilers, just be aware that there will be spoilers for Honkai in this video. Alright, first of all, if you've seen the video, then you know that I absolutely loved the quest. Everything about it was everything that I wanted from the quest. Although having read the comments and possibly reviewed the video, I realized that my opinion was incredibly biased. So I am a huge Yae Ball fan, and all of their interactions were everything that I wanted. But I realized as I was reviewing it, that's not the entire story quest. There's obviously more that I didn't touch on at all in the review. So if you've played the story quest, you know that their interactions take up about 90% of the story. So I wanted to talk about some of the pacing there and some of the other characters. But first, let's start off with what went right. Here's where I pull from the Honkai lore. There's 3 huge things that went on in the Honkai lore that bring me back to how the story's written in Genshin, and I see the parallels. And this is what I think really makes the Archon quest great. So in Honkai, we have 3 major events in the Mei-Kiana storyline. Kiana leaving after she's turned into Hersher of the Void, going on her journey for 4 months, their reunion in chapter 14, and then Mei leaving in chapter 17.
如果拯救你是一种罪，那就让我来当这个罪人。再见了 ，Kiana。
In the Archon quest, we have Kiana leaving. Kiana would be Ball. She left, didn't tell anyone that she was leaving. Yae comments that she never said goodbye and just left. And then we have the reunion. We have their reunion as the Archon quest. The entire Archon quest would be detailing their reunion. And then the very last part is not so much anyone leaving. However, she does go out on a limb and say that she wants to save A in the process of reversing the Vision Hunt, even though it is definitely not this shared goal between everyone in Inazuma. People in Inazuma want the Vision Hunt decree gone. And so does Yae. However, in the process, she is going to save A and bring her back as well. Even though it's an unpopular decision and the people in the resistance probably wouldn't agree. Nothing is going to stop her from doing what she believes in her friend. She believes in her friend, and therefore she's going to do what it takes to bring her back. Exactly the same way that Mei would. In the case of Ball leaving, Yae makes a comment that she never said goodbye.
You know, A never said goodbye to me before she stepped into the plane of Euthymia.
And in the chapter 14 video that I did, I went into depth about how leaving and then having memories of somebody can alter the way that you remember them and the way that you reunite with them. So the fact that they have not talked to each other in such a long time, and Ball never said goodbye to preserve the relationship that they have, that it could still be something if they would reunite in the future, which they did. And we know that Kiana had a huge personality change. So when Mei reunited with her, she was not the same person. All of the memories that Mei had of Kiana are essentially a different person. So Mei's memory will be tainted now because she knows that Kiana is not the same one that she remembers. So she has to basically start anew with somebody else. And that's the same thing that I see happening in this. When Yae and Ball have their reunion, it's been such a long time that they have to start anew. And the reason that I bring up Honkai is not because I think that Honkai did it better, but there's a very important piece of the story that gives the Honkai story a leg up, but not in terms of storytelling. The reason the Honkai story is so impactful is that you follow these characters from the beginning to the end. You know the past, you know Kiana's past, you know Mei's past, you know when they met and how they became friends and what they've been doing from that point all the way up until now. The problem that Genshin faced is that they did not follow the same characters up until this point and had to tell the same story of two characters reuniting and make you feel the same way that the Honkai story did. And I think this is where it really shines, because despite not having seen their story, you are able to connect with them and say, yes, these two characters meeting after such a long time means something to me. And I think the reason that it means something to us is because we come in at the point where they try to reconnect. Have you ever been that person who joins an existing friend group, but you know that you've missed out on something? So everybody has their inside jokes. Everybody knows each other more than you know them and more than you know about them. Obviously, Yae and A have a bunch of history, but as I said before, when you re-meet somebody for a long time, they may not be the same person that you left. So therefore, we're coming in as they start over. Anything that has gone on before this time is between them, and even they have to get over it. So the fact that we're coming in as a newcomer in this new part of their journey means that we don't feel alienated or left out. And I think that's an excellent point of entry. And we've seen how Yae has been affected by this, and we've seen how A has been affected by this. And by being able to be there for their reunion, I think just makes it hit that much harder, because we know what it feels like to come into that point. And the fact that they were able to get the same point across that Honkai was able to by following the same characters, I think is amazing. They were able to elicit emotions of characters that we just met, the way that Honkai was able to elicit emotions of characters that we've been following for the past 4 years. Now to the other side. There is something that Honkai is able to achieve that Genshin may never be able to achieve, and it's giving all of the characters adequate screen time. Honkai only has a handful of characters that are able to persist through the story in any possible scenario. Each character gets their own arc. And even in other characters' arcs, they're able to circle back and bring the characters together because they're all one entity, essentially. In Genshin, we have different regions of characters that would never be able to meet each other because of the location differences, because of the story differences. Which I think was a huge issue in the pacing of the story. Because Genshin has so many characters and only so much time to be able to put those characters on the screen, we saw a significant portion of the story quest being dedicated to the Archon and those closest to her. We had a whole bit about the Resistance, but because they're not the closest to the Archon in the Archon quest, we couldn't dedicate them a lot of the time that they deserve. Which leads me into the pacing of the third act of the Archon quest. We went in knowing that we were gonna meet up with the Resistance and do whatever we had to do there. It lasted barely any time at all. We did our thing there with an NPC, which I'll get into later, and then we left. We moved on to meeting with Yae, and then a slight quest moving on to Sara, and then we moved on to the bulk of the quest, which was meeting with the Archon. So the fact that it's called the Archon quest generally indicates that it's, gonna be about the Archon and everything that goes on in Inazuma. And less about maybe the other characters, but I feel like we've gotten into the fact that the Archon quest is about, everyone as a whole, not specific characters. But if you're gonna show us those characters, you might as well give them a reason to be on the screen. Kokomi showed up, she sent us away, and it was over. We barely saw her again. Goro showed up, we barely talked to him at all. I think we talked to him less than we talked to Kokomi, and then they were gone. These characters have no solid foundation that they were built on for us to understand why they're there and what they're doing, or what they're going to do after the story is over. So despite the fact that I agree that the Archon quest should be about the Archon, I don't think it's right just to throw characters into the story just for the sake of them being there. And the same thing goes for Yoimiya and Ayaka in Act 3. I think they had a great role in the first parts of the Archon quest. Although throwing them into Part 3 seemed kind of haphazard, they already had their time. We talked to Ayaka a lot, we got some exposition on Yoimiya, and her character quest fit into the Archon quest well enough that I almost forgot that it was her own quest and not the Archon quest. I feel like putting them into Act 3 was more of a fan service than anything else. Although, we've gotten to the point that just showing the character is a fan service because the characters barely get any screen time at all. Anyway, so seeing them at all is apparently like a fan service. Not because what's going on is great. The other thing is, we weren't adequately able to give the other characters backstory. Specifically Kokomi and Goro. Their entire existence, as far as we're concerned right now, is to be part of the Resistance. Kokomi leads the Resistance and Goro is part of it. Now that we know what's happened with the Vision Hunt and the Resistance is no longer needed, what are they going to do? In my mind, they have no purpose in the game whatsoever anymore. Which is unfortunate, because I know that they're both going to be released at some point, and we're going to have to circle back to them and say, oh yeah, what are they doing post the Resistance? But the problem is that I don't care enough about them to care what's going on with them now. If we had gotten some exposition into what they were doing before the Archon quest started, maybe I would be more interested to know what they were doing afterwards. Because not only is their character quest going to have to describe what they were doing before the Resistance started, but also what they're going to do after it. And I'm worried that their character quest is only going to cover what happened after it. But in order for it to make sense as to what they're doing after the Resistance, you're gonna have to backtrack a little bit and say this is why they're going back to this, or this is why they're starting off on this journey after the Resistance is over. And we didn't get that at all. And I think that was a shortcoming of those two characters. And again, the problem lies with the fact that after we leave the nation, those characters are as good as over. In terms of the Archon quest and story lore, the characters from Mondstadt, the characters from Liyue, what do they serve anymore? And on more of a personal note, I've had favorite characters from Mondstadt, favorite characters from Liyue, but right now, because we're in Inazuma, if I had to rank my favorite character would be from Inazuma. In the past, if you had asked me where my favorite character was from, it would have been Liyue or Mondstadt. And for that reason, I feel like the characters are disposable. You move on to the next region and you've forgotten about the ones that happened before them. Which is not great for characters that have to make a big impact. On a different vein though, the characters that do show up across multiple nations are the Harbingers, which means that they're the ones that hold enough weight for us to care about them and care about their story, especially when you're gonna kill one off. If you're gonna kill somebody, you have to make it impactful. And the way that you're gonna make it impactful is not to make them disposable, not to make them forgettable. They have to persist through the story, and so far the Harbingers have persisted. Signora has been there in every step of the way, and yet she's still disposable. When she was killed in the story, I was more surprised that they killed somebody. Not her specifically, just somebody. The Harbingers are numbered, so therefore when we kill them, it's a body count. It doesn't matter who we kill or in what order as long as they all get extinguished at some point. And that's not a great way to make an impactful death. So the root of the problem is not being able to give the characters enough screen time. There are so many characters, it would almost be impossible to give them adequate screen time. But then again, are we going to choose characters that deserve the screen time, or are we going to try to give everybody the screen time that they deserve? Another possible fault is making me care about the characters now and forgetting them later. Again, as I said, in Mondstadt, you pick favorite characters and then whatever happens, happens. You have the emotions then and you move on to the next one. The emotions are already forgotten by the time that you move on to the next one. And I don't think the characters make an impact enough for us to remember moving forward. So while I'm focused on that region, I will care. As soon as that region is over, they're gone. We can't just kill the Harbingers for the sake of killing someone. It's gonna get old really fast, so we're gonna have to bump up who makes the impact other than the villain. The last thing is, I think that this story centers around the Traveler a little bit too much. My favorite scene in the entirety of Act 3 is when Yae and A are speaking in the plane of Euthymia. They're talking to each other. However, when the camera pans just a little bit, you can see the Traveler standing around third wheeling real hard. And I guess if you count Paimon, there's a fourth wheel. But because the story centers around the Traveler so much, it almost leads the nation to die as soon as the Traveler leaves. Because the entire story is based on the Traveler. What happens when you take that piece out? What happens when you take a piece of a puzzle out and put it somewhere else? The puzzle's not complete anymore. But I think the regions need to hold their autonomy, even when the Traveler leaves. And that would make it hit harder. Alright, now let's talk about how do we fix this. The first thing I can think of is putting character quests first. Give us backstory on the characters before they show up in the Archon quest, so we at least know why they're there, what drives them, and where their story's going. Where their story's going and how the Archon quest fits into their story. This way, when they show up in the Archon quest, it's not just somebody random who we're trying to get to know, as well as them fulfilling the job they need to in order to progress the Archon quest. If we want to tie up loose ends at the end, you can make a short filler episode talking about where the character ended up, you know, after the Resistance, or after whatever else happened in the Archon quest. We also need to give the Traveler more of a reward for interacting with the characters, because we spend a lot of time with the characters, and yet they barely make an impact on the Traveler. They move around from different nation to different nation, and yet they still seem the same after having visited so many places. What is the impact that these nations are leaving on them? And how is it going to influence their journey in the future? As I touched on briefly, the interactions that we have with NPCs are a little bit too excessive. At the beginning of Act 3, we talked to Tepe a lot. Even though Kokomi's standing, you know, just a few feet away, we're talking to Tepe instead. This section could easily have been replaced with dialogue from Kokomi or dialogue from Goro, characters who we're going to see again, characters who people care about. You can form those relationships with NPCs, and people, like the Cleansing Sakura ritual quest, can appreciate the NPCs. But if you're going to put emphasis on the playable characters, wouldn't it make sense to build the interactions and build the relationships with those characters instead? Finally, something that stood out to me was when we talked to Ayaka for the first time and she was asking us for our help, and we immediately said no, and kind of made the joke of the fact that, you know, all of these nations are asking us for help, even though we're on the quest to find our brother. But speaking from a real world perspective and how we're experiencing this story, the end of the story is very far away, so shouldn't we enjoy the journey along the way? The fact that the Traveler's pointing out that we're doing a handful of chores along the way doesn't help the fact that some of the acts are filler. The fact that we had to go around and talk to NPCs, the fact that we had to go around and fetch things. We should be putting more of an emphasis on those quests and on those journeys, because that's what matters. That's what we're here to enjoy. It's the quest. It should be based on the lore as to why we're helping these nations and what we get from it, and how this knowledge or what we've done for these nations is going to come back up in the future and say, you did this, and therefore it directly relates to this. As of right now, everything that we've done has had negligible effect on what's happening now. So overall, I wish that the playable characters had more interaction, more weight in this story, and that they left more of an impact on who we are as the Traveler, and how those nations are going to move on without us. And that's it, all the thoughts that I've had post playing the story, reading your comments up until now. If you guys agree, disagree, make sure to leave a comment down below. I'd love to know what you're thinking, have more discussion about this. As for now, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me on Twitch. We can talk more about Genshin Honkai. I'll see you guys around. Bye.